Scenarios. Back to the third of the last drop downs. Well, actually, we'll touch reports a little bit, but the next one is where you can run a simulation. Builder, as you know, PhDs, researchers, they like the idea of running simulations, running models. It actually used to be called impact because it was testing the impact of certain decisions that you made. You can run a life cycle predictive scenario up to 10 years. And I say it's predictive because it already assumes that your life degradation happens every year. And to get information out, you're going to want to rally around a custom report. The existing analysis within Builder for scenarios is really just kind of charts and graphs. Simplified view. When you say run a scenario, what you're telling Builder is, for right now, predict to the end of the year, so it goes to the end of your current fiscal year, compares all your sections' estimated remaining service life and condition index against your standards, generate work, put it in order, and then I have to update this graphic because you have a A or B option that we're going to learn about today. Either apply funding or set FCI targets, complete something, maybe complete everything, maybe complete nothing, move to the next year. Compare all my sections, now that they've aged, against standards and policies, generate work, put it in order, see what I can afford, move it to the next year. Your scenario generates a lot of data and it can take a long time. I was having a conversation with somebody that says we have a lot of assets. It had taken 30 hours in the past to complete a large scale scenario. Back in the early Builder days, that was fairly regular. Now they've gotten most everything to be able to run under an hour. This doesn't change how Builder reports or shows anything. A scenario by itself is a simulation run that you can extract for analysis. It doesn't change your FCI. It doesn't change your condition index. It doesn't change anything about the colors that you log in and see. It's just a standalone little report that you can run that says, here's the output of these rules that you set. So, back in Builder, when I hit that drop-down button, we're going to go to Management. Just like on the other configuration elements, you have to navigate through that tree. Select a hierarchy that you're interested in running the scenario at. Create a new scenario. The first thing, well, let's, I'm going to talk about some of the new features first. Paul was talking about earlier creating new sections based upon condition. That used to be the only way to be able to identify funds for localized problems. Now you have the ability to create sample work items. Sampling in Builder is used if during an inspection you hit sampling. You're saying, one, I'm not able to get there. Dawson, many of you guys met one of my guys. He was doing a BSL-4 seed lab assessment on that team. They decided to opt out of the group shower and not go into that lab. So they took an assessment of where it was not being currently used, sampled it to the occupied lab. Sampling can also be used to save time. If you have a 7-story office building and you say, I don't really want to look at the interior finishes of all these floors, they're probably all the same. I'm just going to assess 2 of the floors, and I'm going to use sampling to push that condition to the rest of the building. When it's low cost, low risk area, you can sample. But now that we have this option in scenarios, I like it for localized condition problems. So let's go back into Builder. I'm going to navigate to my roof. I have a single ply membrane roof, 30,000 square feet. We're going to do a pretend inspection of that roof. And now I'm going to hit that button that I bet 99% of you have never hit, even though you're probably in Builder a couple of thousand hours. Sampling. You can say now that I have a northwest corner with 500 square feet that is red minus. You have just inspected only the northwest corner. Now, you want to go back to that default, bring down my square footage from 30,000 because now I only have 25,000 left, and say the rest of it is green. You will have a blended CI. So you have a 93 due to that 95, and the northwest corner that's at a 10. This is supposed to be 5,000, not 500. Okay, so where sampling has typically been done to just look at a part and make it apply to the whole, you would say I only need to sample 20% of my ceiling tiles. I don't want to look at the rest. Here, we're looking at the entire roof. Between our two sample locations, we have 100% inspected. My northwest corner is terrible. But my rest of the surface of that roof is mid-green. You have the ability to identify a condition problem in a specific area in one section.
Is that tricking it then? Because that's not truly a sample. If you're looking at the rest of it and it's green. If you're really looking at the rest of it and it's green, that's not a sample. You're sectioning, you're circumventing it. You see what I'm saying? A sample to me is a sample, it now applies to everything else.
Well, because they're both representative samples, that red minus and that mid-green are included into the CI calculation of an 81. So it's not sampling as it was originally designed.
Okay, that was
It's segmentation.
It's kind of a way that within a certain section you can still segment.
But this is really more like sectioning. You found a bad area, you're sectioning it out.
And this is just a way to get around with only one.
Yes.
Got it.
One section, two locations with independent condition. And because of,
Maybe you could do it on top.
let me see, yeah. Because you can now, in a scenario, generate sample work items, that little 500 square feet area of roof will show up on a work plan, but the entire roof won't.
So the only advantage of this over sectioning the problem is the fact that it's, when you're done with the work, it's going to go all back to one section.
When you complete the work, all you have to do is delete that sample,
Right.
and your section is complete. The quantity doesn't need to be changed. You don't need to update past inspections. You just remove that previous inspection sample.
Go back to the new item or go back to the original?
If you just fix the northwest corner with that 5,000 square feet, it will basically go back to the default, which is mid-green. because you're just fixing a localized issue.
How does this differ from distress rating?
A distress survey is completely different in that now for this roof, I'm identifying one of a number of individual distresses. Like, do I have blisters? Do I have holes? Do I have insect damage? So a distress survey structurally is very different than sampling. It's a different way of getting to a CI as an alternative to a direct rating. But you can distress survey with sampling, you can direct rate with sampling. But again, for this discussion, I just wanted to share in scenarios, if you hit that checkbox, you can no longer require people to section by condition. You can section by sample and still get that on a work plan. So, I put in some extra slides just for people that are getting this later, but back to your inspection view. This interface to add a new sample location, you can delete sample locations, give it a good name because you're going to need to find how to fix that one little localized issue. It all happens in the inspection page. The other one I wanted to talk about was inventory change events that not a lot of people mess with in scenarios. Back to a scenario in our management. Let's do a demo. Yeah, I do. This only has because it has multiple buildings. Ignore the typo. I'm sure it's inventory. What you're saying here is that this facility is going to become inactive, stop generating work as of 2024, effective 2024. Not very exciting when you have a site with one building, but if you are Sandia and you have hundreds of buildings, and some of them are quite old and they have certainly plans for removing them from their inventory, and it's just about 2 to 3 years out, you don't want to run a 10-year scenario, generate work for 8 years of a facility that will no longer be asking for funds. So it's just a way to make that scenario a little bit more accurate to true to life situations. I don't understand why they have the ability to create new facilities, but they can. But nothing new is going to generate work in a scenario, so we'll just worry about the status changes. So those are the two of the more interesting updates to scenarios. The majority of my discussion this afternoon I want to get into is constrained options. For people that have run scenarios, room, can I get a hand up for how many people have run scenarios in general? How many, wait, keep your hands up. How many people have run unconstrained only? Never constrained a scenario at all. All right, so I see there's 2 people that have hit that option for constraining a scenario. This is why I want to do the training. A unconstrained scenario assumes that I have unlimited funds. And everybody has unlimited funds, that's great. Also assumes that anything that's identified for work, whether it be a repair or replace, is completed immediately when it's asked for. What CERL has had for years is a funding constrained option, where you can say, I predict I have this much money per year, set a funding source, complete work based upon that top priority first until I run out of money, and then kick it down next year. Then do all I can, kick it down to the next year. How many people would say that you have an absolute confidence that when you put out that programming funds for money in 3 years out, you always get that just amount? extremely reliable, right? That's not how government works. It's not how it happens. You don't get to have confidence in a set amount every year. There's plus ups, plus down, yeah. What scenarios are often used for is going to leadership and saying, I need this much money or I'm going to fail at my mission. So what they have added is an FCI target to say, if you want to keep all of my housing facilities above an FCI of 80, if you want my hospitals to be above an FCI of 90, if you want my warehouses and storage facilities to be maintained at FCI of 60 or higher, you need to give me this many billions of dollars. That's what FCI Constraint does. It means, what is the money I need to hit these targets? Yes?
With the unconstrained though, when you run the other ones, you don't get a true picture of what your FCI is, because it moves stuff into future years for you, rather than telling you in my current year, I need to know what my unconstrained is, because that's the only way I really know what my FCI in my building is.
What he was saying, for those that are online, is that your scenario, your kind of what if simulation, is not true to life when you're running unconstrained, because it assumes you're doing everything, which means your FCI is always perfect. FCI is work needed that's not funded divided by building PRV. If I have all the money in the world, because I have unlimited money, your FCI is always perfect.
No, I'm saying you need to know what your unconstrained amount is, because then when you apply your funding, you know how much you can't do.
That's the next slide. The one thing I will say, in a scenario, because you're in the current year, your BCI for your first year is just a little bit lower than it is now. It basically extends it to the end of the year, because it doesn't assume that this money that you have, an unlimited amount, can be executed right away. It can be funded and then done this year. So your BCI, it doesn't see a huge improvement first year, even in an unconstrained scenario. Your BCI bump is year 2 of your scenario, because it says, oh, you budgeted it here, you completed it here, so you have your huge BCI increase, and then every year your BCI is going to mostly drop because buildings get worse over time. You get to select, when you create a scenario, in the funding tab, do I want to use my FCI objectives, or do I want to constrain it by a funding scenario? So, let's talk about funding constraint. This is when you tell builder, I have $100 million to spend within this group of buildings. It will, by priority, assign $100 million to your top priority work items. You will have an unknown FCI, because you may get everything done, you may get very few items done. That's unknown. And your BCI is unknown as well, depending upon your funding limits. But this is the constraint. You tell builder, this is how much I have to spend, and the scenario output is, this is your resulting FCI, and this is your resulting building condition score. I had a client during the government shutdown get a call and said, hey, what would happen if we cut your sustainment by 90%? Just on a whim. He basically said we'd had to shut it down and send everybody home. But here, you can actually run a scenario that says, if you really want me to tell you what will happen in 3 years of no sustainment funds, I can absolutely tell you my resulting condition score, and I can tell you all the equipment that it's in a failure state. And then hand you that spreadsheet and say, This is the result of this funding change. To be able to do a funding constrained scenario in your work configuration, you need to have first set a funding source. So back to your work config, navigate to the site or organization that you want to run that scenario at. It has to be at the same level. So we're playing with Savannah River. Said, I'm going to create a funding source called O&M, and it has $50 billion, no, $1 million. $50 million of work that I can do, general operations. And then I had major projects with another 15. And then I showed, we can create a ramp funding source with another $5 million per year. You identify the funding source, the name first. Next, after you've identified multiple sources of funds, you can say, I don't want to just use it for everything. This is not tax collection where they say they're going to use it on roads and then end up put in the general fund and you get to manage with potholes. You can say, hey, my major project funding source can only be used if the work cost is greater than or equal to $50,000. When we put a roof asset management plan funding source, there's a ramp, you can say, these funds can only be used for roofing projects.
You assign that to a specific building?
You can say, these funds can only be used for this building, yes. All those same attributes we know about sections, and really we're talking about funding sections, can be used to say, does this money apply to this section? For those that are in the DoD space, I cannot create a funding restriction to match the definition of sustainment or restoration or modernization because they have rules like it has to be this year, many years, time that ends at the end of design life. It has to be an upgrade of performance capacity. I've tried. I'd love to try more and get closer, but it's not a pure definition.
No, the other problem is this. Those items
Yeah.
are the replacement of the item, not the construction cost.
So he's saying that the work cost that in Builder is really just that section replacement cost. It's really not the project cost that's actually involved. So you could have carpet, which has a $3,000 work item cost, bundled in with 30,000 other things, and it's a Milcon. So yeah, the color of money does not align with funding restrictions.
No, it's not just the color of money. So, sorry if I'm getting too far into the weeds. You have a $100 million Milcon project, but that doesn't mean that's going to complete, sorry, Milcon's a $100 million R&M project.
Right.
You're not going to complete $100 million in work items in Builder. Your project is only so much percentage efficient in regards to Builder work items.
Yes. Yeah. This is in the weeds. Your FCI buy down efficiency for every project is different because of your actual cost. If it takes you $100 million to buy down $50 million of Builder work items, for an FCI perspective, you're only half as efficient. If you're able to fix $10 million of identified Builder work items with 50 grand, you're super efficient with your spend. So yes, work prioritization based upon FCI buy down efficiency is a fun conversation to get into.
Kurt, you said that you had to go down to the site level to set your funding expectations.
No, you can absolutely set a funding at an org level.
Okay.
And that's the level that you need to run that scenario. So when you are in your scenario and you say, I'm going to be funding restricted, it needs to be at the same tier.
Okay.
But I believe you were talking about that is replacement of the equipment, not the work involved.
Yes.
Not
Replacing
the
the
total
equipment.
cost of
That's the
doing
cost
that.
of the item.
Right,
No,
exactly,
how
and
much
that's
you're
what you were
paying,
mentioning.
Construction, replacement, demolition, whatever.
Yeah.
You buy a $5,000 piece of equipment, it's gonna cost you $20,000 to install.
So that's a good statement. We had a conversation with if you are going to be trying to predict how much work I can complete, and you say, well, I get $50 million of sustainment funds, that does not equal $50 million of builder work that you can complete. You have to think about sustainment represents a lot more than just repairing and replacing things that are at their end of life. So there's the project costs that are different, and there's also, you also have to change the filters, you also have to do your preventative maintenance, you also have to do other things that sustainment covers. So trying to predict based upon funding restrictions, this is how much of that I can actually apply to builder, is tough. It is absolutely tough. But that's why I think funding has been underutilized. We had 2 hands in the room of builder users that have ever done a funding restricted scenario for a reason. You asked if you could set funding at the organization level. Yes. If I say for all of National Nuclear Security Administration, I have this much money, and then I set a single priority rule for every section within that group, and then say apply funds based upon the top priority, some of these sites are going to get starved of money that they're used to getting, and other sites are going to get a lot more because of how work prioritization handles things. Remember, you're leveling it out by work priority at the top org. So you could have a site with nothing for builder identified work that fits within that funding parameter because you have an older site with a bunch of old buildings. So yeah, resource leveling from the top org is very challenging.
Just comment along those same lines.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows about Camp Humphreys. Camp Humphreys is in Korea. It's basically it's a brand new facility that's built to consolidate all of the old places that were built in the 50s right after the armistice in Korea. So everything is moving to Camp Humphreys and everything else is slowly being shut down. So they built...
Do I need to, this is probably something that, microphone.
So in that scenario, and that's when I raised my hand that we did it, we did run a site-wide scenario, 10-year plan for them, and it showed like $3 million a year for the first year, and $4 million, and then 5, and then 6, and we hit 2029, it went up to like 137 million. I mean, it went from 10 million to 137. Well, the reason is they built almost all those buildings in 2009, and the 20-year life cycle hits in 2029. And I mean, the management there went virtually through the roof when they saw, what was going to hit them in 2029. So, you have the opposite scenario where you were talking about the old buildings. You can have a base like this where you have nothing but new buildings on it, and that's a big problem for them as well.
That is an advantage of scenarios as well, because you can predict things. A new facility is not going to be free to maintain forever. When you come up to those major milestones of like, we're at their 25-year life, this is when a lot of things are kind of designed to need to be reinvested. It can give you that predictive analysis, but it can also scare management. So, want to get through the training and get you guys out to happy hour before it gets too late. I have now created 2 different funding sources, operations and maintenance, major projects, maybe your roof funding source. You can create an order to which they are applied to your work items. So top items would be done first, and then you kind of trickle down that list. So all of that to say funding scenarios is interesting, but not necessarily able to be representative of your experience. For I've yet to see an organization that went through the training and go, yes, I can use this. It's interesting. You can kind of do some fun analysis and say, this is where I will be in a condition state if my past funding is replicated for another 10 years. Here's where I will be, and that might be problematic. What I really like is the new FCI targets. And this is where you get to say to leadership ahead of you, what is your expectations of my facility's FCI? How much work outstanding as a relationship to their value are you comfortable with for my mission based upon the different building types? You can do it by facility code, CAT code, You can set that with your organization. Once you set your FCI target, it is stable year over year. And your BCI might go up or down, it's going to be variable. But the key thing that is the output is that the scenario says this is how much money you need in year 1. This is how much money you need in year 2. This is how much money you need in year 3 to meet leadership's expectations of you. If money is the output, money is the ask, it's a nice flow. Say, what is your expectation? There's a long history of federal facilities being managed by FCI targets. And say, okay, you give it to me and then I'll take my builder data, run it through the FCI rule set, and give you how much money I need to hit that, just for builder work items. And then you have to escalate that to say, this is on top of all the other stuff that I do, like PMs, like Milcons, and say, but I told you I was going to kind of firm up the FCI.
Just real quick then, I know you began this section with asking the audience, how many of you run a scenario that's unconstrained, and I think the people have done that.
About half.
It was about half. But being that unconstrained means we got lots of work that'll be done on time with an unlimited budget. In the DoD world, or most government world, that's kind of a fantasy. Under what conditions would you want to run an unconstrained?
So where I've seen unconstrained scenarios, and if you guys run a program that,
Can you repeat the question?
the question was, half of the room raised their hand that said that they had run an unconstrained scenario, and the question was, how is that valuable? Because it's an unrealistic expectation. Nobody has all the money in the world to do everything. The way I've seen it used is to say, based upon the organizational standards and policies for the next 5-year budget cycle, if I take all that work the builder thinks I could complete, sum it up at the end of that 5 years, ask for that much money, that'd be great.
So it's planning for a wish list.
Yeah, it's an ask, and then you can also say, I'm going to try to put my buildings in a quadrant of risk and say, here is from this scenario the results, and I've got some high importance buildings with a lot of needs. I've got some low importance buildings with low needs, and you can try to justify your funding based upon even an unconstrained wish list if you can put some real thought in it. And there's a lot of people in this room that have spent hours poring over the data, building PowerPoints to justify funding based on unconstrained scenarios.
Yeah, you hit on it. It's really to show, it's trying to get management to understand the risk that you're at in the building. Because when you show all of that, it's a complete list of work that should be done on your facility. Doesn't mean you can, but we're going to see in our area a huge shift in FCIs from what, because a lot of people believe if it's running and it's not broken, doesn't belong in the FCI numerator. And that's just not true. That unconstrained list shows you that total list of work, and hopefully will open the eyes of your management to seeing, okay, when I have these O&M failures, there's a reason I'm having them, and it's not giving them that false sense of security we have been giving.
But it also could be Congress itself, right? Not even at the management level. You go to Congress and ask for, a restricted 80 million, and you're going to get 60 maybe. If you go to Congress, because they don't know any difference between restricted and unrestricted, go to them with 100, you're going to get 80. That might be part of the reasoning too, to run an unrestricted.
Yeah, the unrestricted, I think what people really use it for is, this is the list of things that need attention based upon my standards of tolerance for risk, not just here are things that are already broken that I've already known about for 3 years, which is not a real good representation of how to plan. So when you start putting in repair and you wanted to put years of remaining service life and notice before it expires, and then get that on a list of things that need attention and need funding now for execution 2 years from now, it feels weighty and it feels like it has some value and it helps decision makers understand. You've put some thought into this budget. You've not just said, well, last year you gave me 80, so this year I want 90. Sounds nice. You know, they want that thick binder of projects that says this is real and this is risk, that is quantifiable. And if you give me this money, I can buy down this from this thickness of risk to that. However much you want to spend, we'll try to lower our risk. So, your FCI target doesn't need to be the one number for all things. You can have different FCI sets for different buildings, but remember an FCI is a building score. So at 100, you have no work needed. At a 0 or negative, you have the same amount of work as facility value. At about a 50, you might think that this tipped the scales and it's no longer worth spending money in that facility anymore. Where you get to set that is right after the policy sequence in your FCI policies. This was just introduced in 3.6 with it working. It started in 3.5, so I don't know what versions all your servers are at, but make sure that you're at 3.6 and this should be successful for you. Your training server that you're able to play with based on your email will work with an FCI policy. It behaves very similarly to your other standards and policies where you get to navigate to your site or organization, create a policy for your FCI, and this is your target, and saying, I'm going to say, based upon my mission dependency index, I have an FCI standard for that range. My low FCI range, this would be your easy to replace buildings, things that if it was out of commission, you could easily pick up those people, move them to another building the next day, and work would carry on as normal. Your medium MDI buildings are, this would be problematic. We would have a certain loss of function. It would put us in a state of chaos, but we could still do our mission kind of stuff. And here, your high MDI buildings this is our weapons systems facilities. They can't go down. We can't lose air conditioning in our server room. We cannot lose a control tower. These are the things that your high MDI need to be maintained at a high level to be able to perform your mission. That attribute is able to be changed to building use category, FAT code, CAT code, you name it, it's up to you. But at the end of the day, what the opportunity for you is to say, what is my numerical value that I'm going to use in that 5-year or 10-year scenario? All right. So I'm sure I need to, log back in.
Yeah, it's pretty quick about kicking you out.
Yeah, I should talk to the server admin. It is a setting, by the way, for those of you that have a Searle managed server, you can change the minutes. They may not go beyond a certain number because they have to comply with security and compliance protocols. So they can't put a 2-minute timeout or a 2-hour timeout on your login because that's not secure.
And when is that training module?
Oh, for hosting? Yeah, you don't want that.
Just kidding.
Actually, I thought about it. I thought it would be fun to run through a server setup, how to deploy custom reports, how to look into the database for, like 2 people. They'd be super interested, but that's it. So, we are in the funding tab, and we're saying that we're going to use FCIs to constrain our work. And it's going to maintain the same FCI every year and result in this is how much money you need to spend to maintain that. So to create a new scenario, again, the slides are for those that want to think about this after the fact or hand it off to somebody else. Go into scenarios, management, find that level to highlight on the left. This is something that a lot of people forget about. They're like, up here or down here. Hit that level that you want to run that 10-year, 5-year scenario. And then it gives you the option for naming it, adding a description, how many years. We talked about sample work items. We'll talk about the rest later. Depending upon what level you select, we selected Savannah River. Here are all the complexes within that site. You get to say which complexes are included in that scenario run. If you hit the double arrow, everything at that tier is in. Or you can just say, hey, I'm only interested in this area of buildings. Other areas of scope interests are systems. So if you're not interested in foundations in your scenario, just exclude it. Deselect that, and then just select the systems that you want in. This controls the scope of what is in that simulation. Think about your naming conventions a little bit carefully, because when you start looking at the top server and you have 5,000 of these, you're going to wish you had a repeatable, reliable naming convention. I like my description to always have the date first, because then I can sort it based upon that description, and it'll always bring up the most recent one at the top, which is usually the one I want to run. Add some descriptive text if it helps. I always like to put the name of the person that created the scenario in the name somehow, because as the creator, you're the only one that can edit or delete a scenario. Even if you're a master planner at the same tier as I am, you can't delete my scenarios. You can rerun them, but you can't change them or delete them. So if I see something interesting, I'm like, Joe, fix this one. I know that he's the one that created it. The next tab in scenarios, when you're creating it, are the rules. What cost book should I use? How much should I assume is in my inflation book? Everybody changing those to ratchet up in the last couple of months? You can use a different policy sequence than what you're using for your day-to-day space. So you can create a policy sequence and a prioritization scheme that is just for your scenarios. And if you use FCI policy, make sure to set your drop down for FCI rule. Talk about the other options. Your scenario is trying to predict how much, or generate a kind of what ifs clause of this is how much money you should ask for over the next several years. If you are updating your work items in Builder day to day and saying this is budgeted, this is planned, this is going to be completed next month, and you're changing status, you don't want your scenario to ask for money that's already budgeted. If that roof is already in progress of being replaced and you told Builder that, well then don't in a scenario ask for that roof money again. So when you say copy that first year work items, it's just moving that status into your year one as a starting point. Work carryover is because not every work item is a single year task. If you actually do want to fix a foundation of a historically significant building, that might take 3 to 4 years to actually execute against. So if you've generated that work to say fix the foundation of that building in 2019 or 2020, and you're running a scenario in 2021, you can have even earlier years statuses moved into your forward-looking scenario. This is important because as of October 1, everything is a past year. So when you say you're managing your stuff day to day, yeah, but October 1, new fiscal year, you hit that copy first year, October 1 knows nothing about yesterday, unless you say, look backwards another year. And I already covered inventory events. So we have created a scenario. Creating it by itself just means that it's available to run. So for this demo, (2020) you find a convention that works for you, give it a good name. I'm going to put every complex in that inclusion. I already told you that I'm going to run it for 10 years. I'm going to have all the systems included in the scope. I'm going to use the "this stuff is expensive" inflation book. I like my demo priorities, my FCI policy. I'm going to use an unconstrained scenario. I don't have any previous fiscal year events, or previous fiscal year work items, and no inventory events. Create. Creating does just that. It sets up a scenario that's available to run anytime. It does not change any of your metrics when you decide to run that scenario. When you run a scenario, especially for those larger clients, it can take hours. You can walk away from your computer, you can go back into Builder and change buildings. This is a completely asynchronous event. It's not dependent upon you sitting there and watching it. So it says start, you can move along with your day, browse away, come back, and now you see, oh, it's 94%.